And Carla, over to you, please.
Okay, thanks, Russ, and hello and welcome to the Federal Government's Distance Learning Association's webinar series. I'm Dr. Carla Lane, FGDLA's Vice President for the Higher Education Sector and the moderator for today's webinar. FGDLA is a nonprofit professional association formed to promote the development and the application of distance learning in the federal government. We actively foster collaboration and understanding among those involved in leveraging technology and instructional media in support of the education and training needs of the federal government. Our membership is derived primarily from individuals employed by the audiences within the federal government. We invite you to join with us in this exciting field. Our web address is fgdla.us. Our speaker for December 15th is Dr. Vincent Opondo of the Social Security Administration. We'll hope you'll join us for that. We are so proud that Zoom is a sponsor of FGDLA and has been instrumental in helping us produce the webinars. We'd like to thank Zoom and Russ Colbert for sponsoring today's seminar. They are the best partners we could have, and they are one of our new and our valued sponsors. Thank you so much, Russ.
Carla, you're so welcome, very welcome. And you know, I say this every single month, Carla, our speakers get better and better. But so far, this is the best one that we've ever had. And we're so happy to have you with us today. Back to you, Carla.
Okay, thank you, Russ. Today, we are focusing on the work of Dr. Schatz. She is the director of the Department of Defense's Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. She's an applied human systems scientist with an emphasis on cognition and learning, performance assessment, learning technologies, modeling, and simulation. She's authored numerous scholarly publications, and she recently co-authored the book, Modernizing Learning, Building the Future Learning Ecosystem. Yes,
there it is.
So she's worked in defense training and education for over a decade. We're so glad to have you. Welcome and thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for inviting me. And thanks to everybody out there in Zoom world who are listening today. Thank you for taking your time to come join us today. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Slides. I promise it will not all be slides. So start thinking about your questions or your comments because we have about an hour. I'm going to talk for the first little bit here about modernizing learning, and then I really want to hear from you. So when I say hear from you, I don't literally mean here because I'm going to see from you because you're going to type your questions and your comments into the chat. So please do that as we go so we can have a nice lively conversation here as we get towards the end. But yep, this is me, and this is the talk today. So we're talking about building the future learning ecosystem. And so what is the future learning ecosystem? Let's unpack that a little bit. So this is, the future. It's the information age of training and education. It's what we're all moving to. It's exciting. It means also that there is something we're moving away from, right? What's the past? The industrial age way of doing training and education, right? And that old way is the time-based episodic approach, right? Where you go to a course and you're in the course because you're in, the first grade, or, it's this time in your career versus this is really what you need at that point in time. It tends to be assembly line like, right? You go through this course and then you go to 101, then you go to 102, and then you go to 103. And it tends to be a one size fits all versus personalized to people's needs. Very focused on input. In other words, let me focus on getting the amount of time right or getting the training objectives right versus looking at the output of learners and how they're performing. A passive model where I'm going to pour my education and training into your head, right? And tends to focus on transferring facts or psychomotor skills. So kind of like the lower level of like the Bloom's hierarchy. Now, of course, this is a little bit hyperbolic. So I know I'm making, a little bit of an extreme comparison, but okay, what's the future look like if that's the past? Right? The future is this lifelong learning continuum from, hire to retire, or maybe, from cradle to grave. It is interconnected, right? So your university course is connected to your workforce training, is connected to that MOOC you took, which is connected to your, federal public service distributed learning that you got. It is personalized to your needs, your background, your mission, focused on making sure individuals actually perform, getting the outcome, an active involvement that also gets to higher level 21st century competencies. I mean, this is what we really mean when we say a future learning ecosystem, is how do we enable this? That's the concept. And before I get into the what, let me talk a little bit more about the why. So, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, admittedly. So why do we want to change the way that training and education, or more accurately, learning and development, is achieved? And part of the rationale is we can, right? The technology today is there where before maybe we couldn't do this like ubiquitous learning connected across all our devices, but we can do that today. We can have data-driven lifelong learning. Similarly, the science is there. We started to understand so much more about how people learn, how people perform. And the mission needs are there, you know, whether it be increasing occupational demands, whatever occupation you're in, there's just so many more expanding demands for what we all need to be aware of. Across the world, there's this concept that the folks at Harvard are promoting called the 60-year curriculum. It's the recognition that across our lives, from about age 15 to about age 75, we'll all probably have about, 5 to 7 careers. Not just jobs, but careers that we have to be upskilled or trained and retrained for. So this constant lifelong learning. And then similarly, as we all probably know, there is an increasing human-machine teaming. And so what does the world look like there? How do we make sure that our personnel, our humans within this human AI equation, are ready for that environment? The answer in all cases is we need to rethink the way that we do training and education. So I'm going to show you a short video about what this might look like. Now, of course, I come from the Department of Defense. This is a little bit of defense focus, but you can substitute whatever your agency is, because we all have these kind of similar requirements in the sense that we all need to have the learning interconnected and data-driven and getting to these big picture ideas. All right, so let me show you. So we're going to start out with a soldier. She's at home doing a little bit of self-development. She's, reading some assigned reading here on military ethics. And her systems know that she's doing this reading, and it updates a competency score for her because she's been interacting with this ebook. So she's able to see, oh, look, my military ethics score increased. Oh, but wait, I forgot to do my pre-training for this upcoming exercise that I need to do. So she's able to go in and see her learner record, her assigned training and education. In this case, a little bit of distance learning that she's able to connect to a colleague and do. So you can imagine in the not too distant future, we all have our VR headsets and are doing a little bit of distributed learning, training and education at home through VR. Now her and her colleague are doing some sort of indescribable VR cybersecurity lab of some kind.
What did you think about that final story?
That was awesome, especially when we got to practice on our own.
What was your rating?
Check this out.
So performance score is actually connected.
Nice.
Yeah, what'd you get? Oh, very nice.
I wonder who our third teammate is.
Looks like we're waiting on an assignment from our trainer.
You can see that this system that we're talking about doesn't replace humans or instructors, but rather supports them. In this case, the instructor is selecting relevant competencies and is able to look at proposed teams based upon how different competencies best support one another on that team.
Here's our new assignment. I know this guy. He's great. We're gonna have a good team.
So you can see a little bit of the interconnection of training and education with personnel and team assignment. and then how it all flows together. And here they're doing some sort of cybersecurity training exercise with some sort of indescript wearable computers. It doesn't matter what these things are in specific, but rather the idea of all these different pieces interconnected. Again, the instructor being enabled by the technology, able to have greater insights and weigh in. That's the red team, right? These are the bad guys in the exercise, playing against the good guys or the blue team. So what I hope the takeaway is this mix of formal and informal training and education connected across all these different technologies and live things with data and strategy and interconnected across the personnel side too. So here she's able to see, hey, I look at my learner record, and because I passed these different training events, I'm able to unlock promotion. And so, you know, just this much more ecosystem approach to how we think about talent, whether it be in DoD or your own agency or even just across society. And that's kind of what we mean when we say the future learning ecosystem. So the question, so hopefully at this point you're like, yes, I want that. You know, I want this like Ender's Game style, you know, future, at least the cool parts that aren't creepy, right? About how we can do the training and education, but how do we do it? What are the specific steps? So I want to talk to you about 4 specific steps today that are applicable to all of us, I think. And the first step in the process here is that we need a continuum of learning, right? This is that lifelong continuum of learning, or in other words, stop building learning islands. Okay, what's a learning island? This is a learning island. It is your learning event, right? It is your classroom education course. It is your training exercise. It is your MOOC that you created, right? It's your one thing. And what do you know about learners before they come into that? Most of the time, we don't know very much about them, right? You don't know what their prior capabilities are, what they bring to the table. And what do you know about people afterwards? Again, it's usually like, all right, we learned all this stuff about, you know, your preferences and your prior knowledge, and then I'm just going to throw out all the data afterwards, right? Drop the mic, I'm out of here. Instead, what if we had more of a relay race team approach to these different training and education opportunities where we could connect them together? So, you know, from onboarding to some basic training to some e-learning, we're passing that baton each time about what we know about the learners. And after somebody goes to your course, we also pass that baton out. Maybe even, you know, from like private sector, right? We pull in a university record or other things like that. So passing the baton. Maybe even incorporating informal learning like videos or like the ebook you saw in the video, or mentorship, or on the job performance, or maybe even life experiences. Now, I realize that what I just described is a big picture, but even if we started to do just a little bit of baton passing, that would be better than we are today. So hopefully I've convinced you that you need to not build a learning island. How can you be a better part of that relay race team to collect and then pass the baton? But there's a problem. So even if our learning islands are connected, how do I make sure that the apples that I'm growing on my learning island are commiserate with the oranges that you're growing on your learning island? Or more specifically, what I mean is, how do we make sure that the way I'm describing the training and education opportunities that people have is the same as how I'm describing the jobs that people are doing, is the same that we're describing the way that people are actually capable? In other words, we need to have a common currency to describe the subjects or the topics, so we can always make sure we're talking apples to apples. Now, we do sort of have that today across the training and education community, and that is the Carnegie Credit Hour, right? So how many credits do you have? How many credits to that degree? You know, what is it, a bachelor's or a master's, right? So these are all like very time-based kind of approaches. And what we want to get is more of an outcome-based approach. How do we get that common currency that's focused on the actual capabilities of people versus how much time they spent sitting in a classroom? And so That is where competencies and credentials come into play. So credentials are pretty easy to describe. Credentials are some sort of authoritative body that comes in and says, yes, this person has these competencies. So a credential could be, for example, university degree. It could be a license. It could be a certificate. And what that's supposed to mean is, hey, you have a certificate for, practicing medicine or practicing cybersecurity or whatever. That's supposed to be that organization saying, I assert this person has these competencies. All right, what are competencies? Competencies are knowledge and skills, but also, if done correctly, it should be all of the other things, the social emotional traits, the motives, the self-concepts, basically all the other things that are below the iceberg that are necessary to have effective job or task performance. And usually competencies are defined at 5 tiers of behavioral, observable performance. And so you might say like somebody has like a leadership competency within the context of a medical team, within the context of being the medical intern, and they're performing at this novice level under these conditions, right? So you want to get specific, you want to have relational, and you want to be able to describe these performance observable activities at multiple layers of performance so we can understand where people are. That gives us the semantic interoperability we need. Because if we don't have learning islands, and if we have a common currency across our islands, that gives us the syntactic and the semantic interoperability to make it next all about data. And honestly, a lot of this vision for the future learning ecosystem resides on the backbone of data. We need interoperable data to make this all work. So what do I specifically mean? I mean a modular open systems architecture. We need all of the different training and education systems that are out there to be able to plug into a common backbone. So imagine from like a data standpoint, that big green Lego block on the bottom, and all of the different training and education systems, and maybe in the future HR systems too, being able to plug into this through common data standards, common interface standards, and other kinds of business rules that enable it. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to let everybody put their Lego castle on our Lego, on our Lego terrain here, but we want to make sure that it's feasible to do so, right? So we want to start to embrace this modular open systems approach. This is one of the things our team has been working on quite a bit. And of course, in order to do that, we have to define where the little Lego block circles are and how far apart they are and what exact size they are. And that's data standards. So the approach we've been taking is focusing on 4 important core data standards for the training and education space. First, learning outcomes. How do we get that detailed runtime data out of a system about what somebody clicked, or did they interact with the ebook, or how did they perform on that simulation-based exercise? Second, we need to know what it is they were doing. You're like, okay, what was that classroom event all about? What were the training objectives in that exercise? Third, we need to know about the learners. What capabilities do they have? What prior experiences or performance can we look at to describe that person? And then finally, across them all, that common currency. So again, across all these different data sets, how do we make sure we're always speaking apples to apples when we're talking about the specific subject matters? So in all of these instances, we're talking about specific data standards. The first one here is one you've probably heard of before. It's called XAPI, and that is the first step in the process. So if all of this sounds good, but sounds a little daunting, just take one step in the process. Start with XAPI and start to implement that within your systems. This is being standardized by the IEEE. So those are the people who make Wi-Fi, right? So this is like a robust industry standard for being able to capture that learner performance, that runtime performance, and get it out. Next is learning activity metadata. In other words, we need to describe each of our different experiences, whether it be an ebook or a 3-semester-long course. We need to be able to describe what's in that event so we can understand what people are getting out of it. We need enterprise learner records as well, that learner record, that baton that we're passing from relay race member to relay race member, that helps us understand who those learners are, what their prior abilities are. And then, of course,
I think we've lost Say. Say, are you coming back? Like you froze for a moment. Could you go back
Oh,
about?
am I here? Can you hear me?
I
Okay.
can hear you now. Go back about 30
Okay.
seconds.
Okay. Oh, 30 seconds. Oh no. All right. Yeah. So let's see. What I was saying is you have your enterprise learner records. Did you get that part?
Yep, we got
Yes.
And then I was saying you also need to have that common currency across them all, right? You need to have the competencies, or you need to have these frameworks of human and machine readable competencies. And this is being updated right now to the shareable competency definition. So it's hot off the presses. They're renaming it a little bit. But all of these, by the way, are existing data standards. If you search for this online, you can find these. You can join the working groups and be members of them. And all of it put together, our team is calling the total learning architecture. So we're building out specs and standards using these data standards to describe kind of the roadmap of how you put your Lego blocks together. And so all of that information is available on our website. And I'll get to that in a minute, like how you can find it. But the point is that it's applicable for all y'all across the federal government, not just for the Department of Defense, although it's certainly applicable for the DoD folks who are out there. But the point is that this is how you build your Lego empire, is by following these data standards and the specifications articulated in the total learning architecture. It's like a blueprint. You can kind of modify it to your needs. And so this is kind of how it works, right? So we got all these different training and education systems that are out there, whether it be your, e-learning or your helicopter simulator or a mobile app or a video or a game, whatever, right? It could be a digital grade book in a classroom, anything that is something that's digital of some kind related to training and education. Now, again, today, these are largely siloed activities, right? We're not sharing data across these. And in fact, a lot of times somebody goes to a training or an education event, and after they're done, we just throw out the data at the end. Maybe you get your PDF certificate that you showed up, but it doesn't have that rich, robust data. So we're leaving all this like digital gold, right? Because data is the new oil, right? Data is the new gold. So we're leaving it all there and we're not capitalizing on it. Instead, what we want to do with this modular open systems architecture is take all of these different individual Lego blocks, expose up the data using XAPI to a learning record store, which is just a database of some kind that authenticates and catches the XAPI statements. It's part of the specification. And then aggregate that up. So you can see these are like federated databases. So you're kind of pushing data, collecting it, pushing it, filtering it, pushing it up, collecting it. And there's a little filter here that helps you select just the good stuff to push up to an enterprise level and expose up across a data fabric. Link those data to those single source of truth competency frameworks, right? So we're all speaking apples to apples across all of our data sets. And other competency or other credentials and so on. Similarly, linking it up to that single source of truth for identity. For those in the federal government, right, there's the federal ICAM initiative, Federal Identity Credential and Access Management, that's helping us with this. And then, of course, being able to aggregate all these data for use, whether it be by the learner themselves, their instructor or commander, or other senior leaders who are making, for example, I don't know, like workforce planning decisions or other things like that using the data. Of course, this all needs to link to an enterprise course catalog as well. So we know what those things are that people are completing. What was the training course, or what was that educational opportunity? So this is kind of the big picture concept of our little Lego castle. And this is all stuff that's real today. These are all things you could start to implement and think about for the future. But there's one last piece that we need in our puzzle, and that is we need to have a workforce that's ready for this future learning ecosystem vision. Because we know that instructors or distributed learning teachers and trainers need to have skill in learning. In other words, they need to have pedagogy or andragogy capability. They need to understand instructional design and best practices for delivery and interaction. But that's not really enough anymore, because they also need to understand learning experience design, right? The whole context of how people and technology and learning interact with each other. And similarly, learning analytics, because so much of this is data driven. So how do we incorporate that data science piece to it? How do we best leverage the learning technologies? Which ones are most appropriate? How do we make them most usable and most functional? How do we think about how humans interact with systems, not just at a tactical level, but also at a big picture systems level? How does it fit within our organizations? And overall, this really comes down to learning engineering. And that's the new term of art. It's the integration of all these concepts: usability, learning experience design, learning analytics, pedagogy, instructional skill, all of that stuff together learning engineering. And so it's not just like the next generation of instructional design, it's so much more. And so that is another thing that you can search for. IEEE is doing some great work on that as well. And so there's a kind of a burgeoning community of people who are trying to get their arms around, how do we do this in practice? So in summary here, first, stop building learning islands. We need to be good members of the relay race team, passing our data, passing information from one to the next across somebody's lifelong continuum of learning. Second, let's move to a common currency, not the Carnegie unit, but let's move to a common currency that's outcome focused, such as competencies and credentials. And again, these are things that can be articulated through data standards, and we can have common frameworks that we can point to using linked data so that we're all using the same terms of reference. Third, we need to build the data backbone. And that's something our team at the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative is already working on. And of course, we're not the only ones. There's a lot of folks across IEEE, industry, and so on that are working towards this Internet of Learning things. But everybody else who's out there, everybody who's part of the community needs to embrace it and start to put those data standards into your systems so you can be part of the larger Lego block empire. And then fourth, we need to invest in our faculty and staff and other infrastructure from a human perspective. We need to level up our training and education professionals for this new era. And of course, that doesn't mean every single person needs to be, an omni learning engineer, but rather we need to have teams who are developed to be able to do the full facets of what learning looks like in the future. So we already heard this at the beginning. So thanks, Carla and Russ. You gave a nice pitch for the book, but there's the book right there. And you can also get this from our website. It is open source. It's government developed. It's on the government publishing website. You can get it there too, although it's kind of a pain. So you may just want to get it from our website, but it's all open source. It's available for y'all for free. And please reuse it, steal graphics out of it and put them into your own presentations so that we can all start moving in the same direction. This book gives a blueprint from like a strategic and a scientific and technology level on how to do what you just talked about. So the more specific down in the weeds stuff is on our website, like this is how you implement Kafka and Keycloak, like that's on our website. But this book talks about the bigger picture, like, all right, how do we think about enterprise-wide infrastructure across a society, or certainly across an agency? What are some of the concerns? Cybersecurity, privacy, policy, right? So that's what this book says. And this is our website. This is a link to the video. It's on our YouTube page as well, so you're welcome to reuse that as well. And as mentioned, like here's the system administrator guide for the technology I was just mentioning. So if you want to like geek out and like, figure out how you implement some of these different specifications that I mentioned, or understanding, different steps in the process, you can find that all here on our website. And I also, just because I'm coming here from the Department of Defense, I wanted to foot stomp a few things from our DoD side of things. Which is firstly, there's the SecDef's letter to the force when the SecDef Secretary of Defense was first brought in, and he emphasized here innovation and modernization and growing our talent, which I think are really important for what we're talking about. There's also DoD digital modernization and data strategies, which are similarly emphasizing these concepts, albeit broadly. But if you look at the personnel and readiness strategy, it also talks about encapsulating digital and data modernization within the talent space so that we can get that educated, trained, and prepared personnel. And so anyways, yeah, so I just want to kind of emphasize that for any of the DoD folks who are out there. You don't have to be DoD. These are all, they're good strategies regardless. And then this is our website. And so again, just to emphasize, if you go to our website, lots and lots of good resources here. Highly recommend you click resources. It's a good place to go. News and media has always good news articles, like the latest on XAPI. Also, our R&D page has a lot of really useful information about different projects, such as our competency stuff, our XAPI work, new CMI5, and many of these pages have free and open source, whether it be technologies or articles for you to take a look at, and lots of videos as well. So you can get how-to guides through video and so on. So anyway, just that little pitch there. If you have trouble finding something there, or if you'd like more information, you can also contact us. The ADL initiative actually has authorities to support federal-wide. So if you're out there from a different agency besides DoD, that's okay. Go ahead and contact us. We like to support you. All right, with that, I'm at the end of my presentation, so I'm going to turn it over to a Q&A portion here. And I see we have a little bit in the chat, which is great. And if you guys can unmute, I mean, this is all on Russ, so I don't know who has permission to mute or unmute, but I will turn it over to him and let him moderate us here a little bit.
Say the first thing that a lot of people are asking is this recording going to be available? And the answer is absolutely yes. And the recording will capture everything that Say has been doing today. So we'll see her slides, we'll see her annotation, and we'll see the great enthusiasm that she has when she's talking about what she's doing.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm happy to share slides with folks if that's useful. Although maybe the recording is better because then, you have the narration on the slides. I don't know. But also feel free to contact me if there's any resources that we can provide. As mentioned, as a government organization, we like to give all the stuff away that we can, everything that's in the public domain, whether that be content or software. And we have a pretty healthy GitHub page for those techies out there. Yeah, and
maybe
go ahead, sorry.
Let me just ask you a question. Maybe a place to start here. I mean, I'm thinking about the universities where I teach, but also any other organization. So what would be the first steps in beginning to really put this together, model it? How would you suggest to an organization that they begin and move forward? I mean, you mentioned a couple of small things, but something bigger that would get people off and actually running and doing more. Because I can see where I work, I mean, this would be frightening, scary.
That's fair. That's fair. So, and it's a lot, right? It could be a lot. And so the first step in the process, obviously, is just getting your head around it, right? And so coming to events like this is a perfect first step. Start to understand the concept, read books like this. It's not the only one. There's other people publishing stuff like this. So, get up to speed just a little bit so you yourself understand the concept of, okay, we're talking about this lifelong continuum of learning. How do we enable it? Just get some fluency. Second, though, when you're starting to talk about specifics, XAPI is, I think, the very first step in the process, because that starts to move you to a data-centric approach to things. And you're going to try it the first time and it's not going to work very good. And you're going to have to you're going to try it and you'll be like, I didn't implement this correctly. And then I asked the wrong questions and I didn't measure things very well. And then I did the analysis and the analysis wasn't helpful. That's just going to be part of the process. It happens to everybody. It's okay. So try that out. Start to get your feet under you about how to instrument training and education with XAPI. There's a lot of guides out there. You can start with CMI5, which is sort of the training wheels version of it. So, and that's, by the way, on our website, there's a really nice how-to guide on how to get started there. So start there, start getting your processes in place, start getting people thinking in a data-centric mindset. And that's going to take a little bit, because it's not just about, hey, how do I, get more data out of my e-learning? It's about changing the whole way people think about these training and education experiences, right? And how we use data within them. The third thing I would say is, especially for this community, really get involved and read up on learning engineering. I think that's going to be the next big thing, because that's the tip of the spear. That's really where the rubber meets the road as far as implementing this future learning ecosystem vision, right? We need people who understand pedagogy while also understanding learning analytics, while also understanding infrastructure and policy. And that's the learning engineer.
Mm.
Oh, and Avrin also, thank you, Avrin. Avrin also says, don't forget about iFest, which that's terrible that I didn't plug it. But so there's also an ADL themed conference called iFest. It's usually held in the DC area around mid-August. And I say usually because of COVID, it was virtual the last 2 years, but it should be hopefully back here mid-August again. And it is a really, really good place for you to geek out with fellow nerds, as well as to get the latest, support. It's particularly useful for people who are in the federal government or, other governmental organizations, because it's designed for that kind of industry government intersection in these kind of distributed learning modernization topics. And for the folks who are in DoD, and Victoria, I see your question. So, but I want to call out for folks who are in DoD, like the Air Force, there's also a DoD program called Enterprise Digital Learning Modernization, or EDLM. If you go to our website, you can see some news articles about it. And it's basically the DoD reform effort to build what I was just talking about. And so that's a lot of the work that my team and I have been working on, is to try to build out that infrastructure, working with senior leaders to build out the policy. And so this is all stuff that's real. It's really moving in that direction. For the DoD folks too, I will say that XAPI, which is what I was just talking about, the Experience Application Programming Interface, the way that we get data out of these digital learning systems, that is actually part of policy. It's in the DoD instruction 1322.26, as well as the official DoD, it's called the DISR, the DoD Information System Registry, something like, no, DoD IT Standards Registry. I don't know. You know how we are in DoD. We only know the acronyms for things. All right. So now there's a whole bunch of questions in chat, and I'm just chit-chatting here. So Victoria has been so patient. I feel like I should talk to Victoria's question. So Victoria asks, Victoria, who works for the Air Force, so thank you, appreciate you being here. Do you have any tips to push a reluctant SME, subject matter expert, or even other training and development personnel who struggle with moving away from the old way of training? Yeah, I know,
Wow.
it's such a challenge, right? So are you seeing this too, Russ? That you get
I'm
some
just
of the old
thinking, I'm just thinking about my training in the U.S. Navy. It was incredibly old style, and yes, it is today very difficult to move from the way we did things in the past to everything that we can do, and for everything that is possible. Yes, it's very difficult, but the student is the one that suffers if the organization does not move to the new methods of training and education.
Well, not just the student, the organization.
That's
I
right.
am a firm believer, this is especially true for DoD, but I think it's true everywhere. You know, like DoD has this like operational mission, right? It's like, it's very like intense, but I think it's true everywhere. Like, how are we all going to survive our agencies, our work, our mission, if we do not get the people upskilled, reskilled, and we don't get the talent? I think it's the only way for us to go, because otherwise there's such an expanding range of knowledge, skills, attitudes, abilities that people require today, right? So like for the military, it used to be move, shoot, and communicate. And now it's like all of that plus cybersecurity and tactical casualty care on the battlefield and speak another language and all these other things. And then similarly, the sophistication of what people are being asked to do is just huge, right? So, okay, you need to make decisions, but also strategic decisions. And also you need to be aware of global politics and culturally aware, right? And, oh, by the way, that new technology is coming out next year. And, oh, there's new tactics, techniques, and procedures. So it's just this constant churn. So it's really challenging. I don't see that we're going to get there unless we change, fundamentally rethink our learning and development system. So this is the choir, preaching to the choir. What can you do to help move the needle? One of the things I would recommend for everybody here is I'm a big fan of the SAMR model, SAMR. That stands for substitution, adaptation. It's just like putting me on the spot here for all these acronyms. Substitution, adaptation, modification, and redefinition. And if you search for that online, it's by Ruben Pondentera, I think is how you say his last name, but it talks about the concept of how typically in educational technologies, when we introduce a new technology, we just like recreate the old style in the new technology. So for example, oh, we got an e-learning thing. Great. Let's take the sage on the stage and stick them in e-learning. And then it's terrible. And everyone's like, why is that terrible? Well, you just took something that arguably might have been terrible there in the real world, and then you ported it to a venue that it was absolutely not meant to be on. And now you have a more expensive way of doing a thing that was poor. That's substitution, right? An ebook is a great example, right? I got my ebook, right? I take my print version of a book and I make it digital. That's substitution. All right, how do I start to augment it? Well, I take my ebook, I make it digital, and I can search and I can highlight. Okay, so like that's better, but it's still not really there. You start to get up into those higher levels. How do I modify what I'm actually doing? Like, what if I had an ebook, but it actually had like embedded videos and it had quizzes and it had those learning analytics on the back end so the teacher can see who's actually read which pages? Now I start to have a different venue that I'm really capitalizing on the new technology. And then eventually, maybe I can completely redefine how I do a job. Like maybe instead of teaching someone how to do aircraft maintenance through a textbook, I have an interactive manual so that when somebody goes to go do the aircraft maintenance, they have a whole community and people are leaving notes and I can highlight words and somebody else around the world who's also looking at the same ebook can have a conversation with me about it, right? You could imagine being able to transform things, but that's up to us. We have to really push for those higher levels and not allow people to stop at the low ones, because that's the big risk. Otherwise, you're like, oh, I spent a bunch of money, I ported something that was legacy to the new approach, it was really expensive, and now it's not good, and everybody's unhappy, let's just quit. Sorry, that was a little bit of a soapbox.
No,
if
that
you
was
couldn't tell.
fascinating. That was fascinating, Say. May I suggest that Fran, our dear Fran Kessinger,
Let's
which
see
we
what
all
Fran says. Yeah.
absolutely, and I was going to say that we all know and love so much. Can you see
Oh, I thought you were going to
her?
read it. I was waiting on you to read the question.
It's
Sure.
really long.
That's all right.
Say it's
First question, what has been your experience in relationship to startup costs to modernize a traditional environment to a modern ecosystem? Not specific dollars, but cost elements like ramp up costs. And second, how does this modernization movement change the way instructional designers will provide support? Oh, these are great questions. So first one, what are the costs in this, right? And so it's a good question. And it's hard to answer it because I feel like organizationally, we're all modernizing towards digital and data systems, broadly speaking. So for example, a lot of the work that we're doing currently is focused on how do we move legacy systems to cloud environments, to open architectures. These are all requirements for DoD, and I assume other agencies, digital and data modernization in general. So are those costs to modernize training and education, or are those just generic like organizational costs of modernizing in general? I don't know. But yes, there are, cloud modernization, DevSecOps modernization, moving to data infrastructures, and that modernization, of course, the associated cybersecurity, privacy, and other kinds of policy modernization. And, being able to move towards enterprise systems. A lot of times I'll call that the ugly transition that we have to go through right now to move from all of these little silos of excellence, right? Those little, like that little target I showed, right? Where you have your little learning island, right? Well, if we're going to connect across, this is a real shift to moving to enterprise systems. And there's going to be a lot of cost. It might be organizational cost, not tangible, resources that are associated with that. But I know that's daunting. But we don't have to go there all at once, right? The first little baby step in the process is implement XAPI in your systems. Now, I know that sounds like, oh, it's just a little thing, but it's not, because like I said earlier, it's really about starting to shift how we think about training and education, starting to be a data-centric approach and starting to get that more iterative kind of learning engineering approach to how we do training and education. And that starts to be, the training wheels for everything else. So that's a good step one. And that can be small. Like it doesn't have to be huge and expensive. It can all be incremental. And that's the big thing, is you can do this incrementally. And even if we just take a few steps down the process and don't get, to the 100% mark, we're still making progress and still improving things. Second, right, how is this going to affect the way instructional designers provide support? And I think that's a really critical question, because if we implement XAPI or move to a learning ecosystem or any of the other things I was talking about, and we do it badly, it's going to be worse. It'll be expensive and it'll be worse. And then we're going to lose people's trust because they're not going to want to participate. I mean, how many of us out there have taken really bad e-learning, probably compliance training of some kind, right? And like, we're that community, right? So it's easy for us to go, that was a bad course. It's fine. It's a one-off. But for the people who that's their only experience, they start to think, all e-learning is bad, right? I hate these e-learning courses. It's just, death by slides, and I click the button a whole bunch of times. I always say, like, hey, it's really easy for anyone to do something badly. Like just like anything else, there are bad e-learning courses out there. That doesn't mean the whole class of e-learning is bad. In fact, there's some really, really good e-learning courses out there too. But we all have to be the quality control across this community, because otherwise, we're not going to get a second and a third chance of whether it be for leaders or learners themselves.
Hey, Say, in the Navy, what we used to say about instructional design, and it's almost exactly what you're saying, And when we had to transition from traditional methods of learning to the electronic method of learning, we used to say, if you design your instruction poorly and very bad, using distance learning and the technology that we had in the Navy, we could deliver bad education and training to more people quicker. And we used to smile and laugh at it. And then
Yeah.
we used to say, oh my, we have to get really a lot better at what we're doing.
See, I always think I agree with you 100%. I think that technology amplifies, right? So you had a course that you could deliver to 30 people face to face. It amplifies. You could have 30,000 around the world. You had a course that was mediocre, sort of like direct instruction staged on the stage face to face. You amplify it up, and now it's this like really horrible page turner, right? And so, yeah, we have to be so careful because it's an amplifier, and we know better. But we have to be that quality control. And for those of us in the government, we have to write contracts that include quality control criteria for the courseware. That's one of the biggest things I see across government is, we will contract for courseware. And it will be, hey, I need a course that's going to be X number of hours long. It covers these topics, includes, level 2 assessment and level 3 interactive multimedia instruction. So we have some of that. But then when it comes to like, oh, and it's good quality, or yeah, maybe we say implement X API, but then when we don't say and do it right? We just say implement it, right? And so you see either bad implementations of X API or like really bad quality courses. And I'm not saying it's easy. Like, it's hard to articulate some of those quality control metrics, especially the ones that are more qualitative, but that's the only way to get there.
Well, we have a question from Sarah.
I
Sarah,
see that.
you see that?
Yeah, so Sarah's asking about
looking
competency-based badging.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so badging is another way of saying digital credentials, right? So if I say credential, you can go ahead and substitute that with the word badging, at least within this context. A credential could be like an actual paper certificate, like what I have on the wall here. That's a credential, but within the context of what we're talking about, we mean something that you can actually have digitally signed and pass around, and that's a badge. I don't know what the best practice of that is. There are a few different data standards out there for those. Somebody else on the call here might actually have a little bit more knowledge about that than I do. I will say, there's the old school. They used to be Mozilla. I think it's IMS Global now. Digital badges. The credential engine has the credential CTDL, credential transparency description language. And I'm sure that there's a few others that are out there similarly. I think as long as we're moving to a Lego block approach to being able to encapsulate those credentials in a way that's interoperable, that's going to be the key. And there's several ones that are out there that I think are going to help us with that. I don't know if Avrin or other folks who are out there who I know are tech nerds who want to weigh in on some of these different data standards, you're welcome to do so too. So, I have a question for you all here, and certainly, everybody who's out in the chat, feel free to chime in, but certainly, Carla and Russ, you are on the stage here, so you have to answer. So what do you think is the most significant barrier that's preventing people from taking the first step forward in modernizing in the local level? I don't mean like big picture, implement galactic worldwide requirements here, but like just getting the first step forward to changing the way we do learning and development from the old school approach, that, black and white picture, to going towards this more futuristic learning ecosystem, technology-enabled, data-driven, integrated approach. What do you think is the biggest barrier? I see Victoria has chimed in. 10 points to Victoria because you were the first. So leadership that does not understand why something needs to change. That is a big problem. And
it is.
I mean, I have a lot of energy and I talk about this stuff all the time, and I still run into that too. How do you convince people that there is an organizational need and that the old way of doing things, the death by slideshow, click the button a bunch of times, is not sufficient? I think, starting with the organizational need obviously is really important, right? Hey, we're not going to be able to keep pace if we don't move forward. That's not enough. we can all point to anecdotes. I don't know if you all are experiencing this. I certainly see it on a personal level around me. It's really hard to find the talent to be able to fill some of the higher end positions and to retain talent because there's such a shortage. The Chamber of Commerce actually published a report on this, I want to say last year, in collaboration with the White House. I think it was the Office of Science and Technology Policy, but don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure. But it's in collaboration with the White House, talking about this SANS-demic, right? There's a bunch of people who are unemployed, and there's also a bunch of people who have jobs that are unfilled. Like, how is it that we have this, where we have this SANS-demic, right? And of course, the gap here is being able to upskill and reskill and match people to the jobs. And the only way for us to be able to get to that and really solve that without in just, as onesies and twosies, but like at an enterprise level, is to start to move to these data-driven learning systems, right? So that people can get upskilled, we know what they need, we can help do the placement. It's hard to convince people, but send them the video of this and make them watch it. Have them go to iFest.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems, at least in places where I know about, in work, it's the funding and trying to move into something else. Even if I'm designing a course and I need some video or something, I have to beg, plead, give up firstborn if I had one to be able to do that. And there's just no money there. Another thing that's happening is that so many universities are buying other universities and putting together conglomerates. And so in order to fund all those purchases, they're letting core faculty go, full-time people with major experience. They know what's going on. They know how to teach. They've been teaching online forever, and they're really good at it. But now they're without jobs. And it's unfortunate that it's that bottom line mentality rather than how much can we actually advance? What is our mission? How do we really train the students that we have? If we don't start with first grade, preschool and all the other things that we're doing, but we can't just get them in college and suddenly go, bang, you're going to be brilliant, because we don't have any stepping stones along the way. So it's a bigger part of the problem. And I'm hoping the Department of Education will actually step in and begin to do some of those things.
Yeah, that's a big problem, right? What you're describing is like this society-wide challenge. And the good thing is that there are people who are thinking about this, right? So I mentioned the Chamber of Commerce. There's a T3 innovation network that the Chamber of Commerce has been doing. This is not specifically what you just said, but it's more for the folks who are on the infrastructure, data standards side of things, but it's starting to reach across. So my point, though, is that there are good exemplars of folks who are trying to reach across, whether it be K-12 or higher ed or military or government or just regular society. And of course, we all can play our part in it, right? Like, that's the big thing, is if we can be part of the collective relay race team.
Well, we have to be, but you have to look at all of these things. They're feeder tubes into what we're able to do as a nation. And if we're just ignoring everything that's happening in the feeder tubes, then you get to a certain level, and now what do? You can, API and everything else falls apart if you don't have a substantial number of people who are in the pipeline and able to take over. And that's what we're facing.
Exactly.
We've got the baby boomers moving out. A lot of millennials are going, who needs this? So, if you're collapsing the work ethic between those two, and it's getting more and more narrow, now you've really got a problem. So it's systemic, and the implementation of it is really important.
And it comes back to quality control on the output side, right? Because if a highly experienced faculty member looks the same on paper as a less experienced, maybe less skilled instructor, but one is very expensive and one is not expensive, then it's a really easy decision for a university or an organization, whatever, to substitute one for another. So you need to have those differentiators. We as a community need to differentiate and be able to articulate the impacts of quality. There's so much good research out there too, by the way, and hit me up if you want these citations. I love talking about this. There's so much good research about the impact of an instructor, faculty member, teacher, whatever you want to call that person. But somebody who's skilled versus somebody who's not skilled has a huge impact. There's a direct monotonic, or in other words, linear correlation between an instructor's skill and a student's outcomes, to the point, and this is largely based upon somebody's pedagogical ability or andragogical, or whatever you want to say, their learning skill, their teaching skill, vice their subject matter expertise. So there's been some research showing that it was like 4 times more impactful, somebody's ability to use appropriate instructional tactics versus their subject matter expertise. So really, really good research out there supporting this notion. We just have to be the ones who are out there talking about it.
Let's do a webinar on that in 2022.
All right, let's do it. All right,
We're
hold on.
also
There's
going to
like
do
we
the
got to do
learning
lightning round
engineering
here.
one too. So
We got to do lightning round. There's like 5 or 6 comments in the chat. So Sarah talks about the human infrastructure and being able to collaborate. Hey, I got something for you there. Go to our website, adlnet.gov, and we have a number of different working groups and other things that we support across federal government. Shoot me an email. I'm really easy to find. I mean, like if you just search my name, you'll find me like wherever. Like shoot me an email, and we can connect you up with the working groups that exist within our community. I also mentioned the IEEE, the Learning Technology Standards Committee. They're very active. They're good folks. They have a learning engineering group as well. And these are the communities to help get you involved with. And none of those cost any money. So, you know, Carla, you're talking about budgets. So that's a good place to start. You can also come to iFest, which is no cost for government personnel. Doug, hi Doug, is saying, for us, the challenge is getting agency managers and current instructors to see the difference between pushing knowledge and focusing on outcomes. I would also recommend, by the way, our Norwegian ADL colleagues. So we do a lot of work internationally with our colleagues across other governments. Our Norwegian colleagues have released open source. You can use it and have it. 2 e-learning courses in SCORM, of course, so they're interoperable, called But Will It Work Online? And yes, it works online. These are exemplars of high quality asynchronous e-learning, and you can get them for free if you search for Nordic Defense Cooperative or NORDEFCO. And But Will It Work Online? You will find it. And if I'm really quick, I might be able to find it for you quickly, or somebody else might be able to put it in the chat. But here, I will start by putting a link to the NORDEFCO. This is our Nordic Defense Collaborators. And again, we have bilateral agreements with these folks. So these are good folks we work with. If you go to that website, they have a lot of free resources, including those courses that I mentioned. They only ask if you do use them, just shoot them a note because they like to know that you liked them. And let's see, got Peter says, is there a threat that a DoD level total learning architecture with data on learner skill sets could compete for cross-department talent? Maybe. Departments wouldn't want other agencies' learner data available outside of their agency. Ooh, that's, I mean, DoD just is going to suck all the talent away anyway, right? Like, isn't that what we do with the 800-pound gorilla? I'm just joking. So, but in all seriousness, I think my guess would be that federal-wide, and I suppose this would be OMB or Congress, would certainly say, hey, public service data is a enterprise-wide, federal-wide strategic asset. So there is no hoarding of data, would be my guess. In fact, there may already be things in like the Data Act of 2014 that say something along those lines. I can tell you on the DoD side, this has been a strong top-down guidance in the last few years from our Chief Data Officer and more recently from the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Hey, this is not your data. This is our data. It is a strategic asset. There is no hoarding. And that's the only way we can get there. I mean, will we compete for talent across agencies? Maybe. Or I mean, maybe ideally we could get to a place where we're operating as like one big system versus more competitive across different agencies. I don't know. I can't solve world hunger all at once. Margaret says that she has to log off. All right, bye, Margaret. And Avron says that he has to log off too, and it's good to see you too, Avron. So I think we're like 1 minute over. I was kind of quick for my lightning round. So I think folks are probably dropping off now. There's a few folks left, and I'll just kind of, again, reiterate, please visit our website. You can connect with me. You can connect with my team. You can see the events we're going to be at. So if you want to link up with us there, and yeah, let us help you. Let you help us. Tell us what we don't know so that we can get smart as well. And let's connect across all of our communities here.
Say,
all right,
there
Russ, final words.
There was no way in the world that we were going to cut you off. You were answering those questions so greatly, and we thank you for that. Carla, over to you, please.
okay, can you hear me, Russ?
I can, yes, we
Okay, because
can.
my picture is frozen. I just wasn't sure. So say thank you so very much for agreeing to be here today. What a privilege. We're really enjoyed it. And for all of you who did sign on today, thank you for being with us. And I hope you'll join us again for our next seminar. And that will be in December, and you'll be hearing from us. Thank you all and good afternoon.